Greetings, loyal subjects of the Imperium of Man. I am Librarian Elias of the Adeptus Astartes. I am creating a series of recordings with the intent of educating the general populace of the dangers of the galaxy. All of this information comes from the Lexicanum, provided to me by the Adeptus Mechanicus. I will be reading verbatim from their archives. This recording will cover one of the few allies the Imperium has, a chapter known as the Lamenters. The Lamenters are a Space Marine chapter of Blood Angel's descent. Long dogged by misfortune, they sided with the Rebel forces during the Badab War. However, they were granted the Emperor's forgiveness at the conclusion of the conflict. However, they were subject to the undertaking of a penitent crusade. That crusade eventually brought the Lamenters directly in the path of High Fleet Kraken, bringing the chapter to the brink of extinction. As stated before, the Lamenters are a successor chapter of the Blood Angels, yet they have avoided the fate of others implanted with the gene seed of Sanguinius. While they manage to control the flaws of their gene stock, they still succumb to it in extreme circumstances. Even so, at the end of the Dark Millennium, stories have begun to circulate that the Black Rage has returned tenfold after their flawed attempts to cleanse it from their gene seed. For much of their history, the Lamenters have a record of effective and well-intentioned service to the Imperium, yet they have been subject to extraordinary levels of misfortune. Their ill luck has seen them fighting in more desperate defenses and last stands than any other chapter of its age, and they accept it with symbols of grief and lamentation. The Emperor's Tarot predicts that their misfortune will only get worse. As a product of the so-called cursed founding, the Lamenters were long considered a successful result of whatever mysterious methods were used to the creation process of this founding that so damned a number of their brethren chapters. Despite showing no signs of mutation or incipient madness, the noble Lamenters still found themselves shunned by a great number of existing Astartes chapters due to their association with the cursed founding. By the early years of Millennium 37, the majority of the surviving cursed founding chapters were embroiled in various disputes concerning their right to exist. As some of these became violent, the seemingly pure Lamenters decided to quietly relocate to the western fringes of the galaxy. As a fleet-based chapter, the Lamenters elected to go on a crusade against the enemies of the Imperium, an endeavor that would take up much of the next millennium and a half. Their self-imposed crusade was curtailed when the chapter was once again relocated en masse, this time on the order of the High Lords of Terra. The Lamenters, along with a number of other fleet-based chapters, were tasked with repelling chaos incursions from the Eye of Terror. During one such defense against the Black Crusades, the Lamenters' status as a cursed founding chapter worked against them once more when the Mortifactus chapter, a successor chapter of the Ultramarines, refused to associate with them and abandoned the Lamenters during the defense of Corilla from the Black Legion. The Lamenters elected to remain and defend the populated Imperial world despite this change in situation, and suffered heavy casualties as a result. By the time a relief force made up of elements from the Ultramarines and White Scars made it to the planet to rescue them, barely 200 battle brothers of the Lamenters were left in an early demonstration of the kind of serious misfortune that would become a plague to the Lamenters. The survivors of this campaign were immediately caught in a warp storm and vanished, with the entire chapter swiftly being declared lost in the warp and presumably destroyed. In recent years, the Lamenters, having returned from the warp and built up their strength, returned to crusade duties, this time around the galactic core, before being once again reassigned by the High Lords of Terra in mid-Millennium 41. Along with the Astral Claws, Mantis Warriors, and Charnel Guard, the Lamenters were transferred to the Maelstrom Zone as the Maelstrom Warders, an Astartes brotherhood formed to defend local Imperial space against threats emanating from the Maelstrom. Close ties were formed between these chapters, particularly between the Astral Claws on Aloft Huron and the Lamenters, although reports say that the Charnel God was withdrawn from the sector shortly after. It has been theorized that the demonstrations of friendship and the bonds of brotherhood undertaken and shown by the Astral Claws to the Lamenter, things not familiar to the often spurned Accursed Founding chapter, may have had a significant impact on the chapter's subsequent behavior, as early in the last century of Millennium 41, Luft Huron, the tyrant of Badab, instigated the Badab War, drawing the Lamenters and Mantis warriors with him into armed conflict with the broader Imperium somewhat unwilling combatants. The Lamenters refused to compromise the honor bonds forged with the Marines errant during the Corinth Crusade by firing at them. Instead, using maneuvers and numbers to drive them off, the Lamenters were eventually removed by the war by the actions of the Loyalist Minotaurs chapter, who managed to locate the Lamenters' fortress monastery, baiting the entire chapter to rush to its defense. In the brutal ambush and shipboard fighting that followed, the Lamenters were mauled, eventually being forced to surrender, with only 300 battle brothers remaining, most of whom were wounded. It was found that the chapter's siding with the renegades was not from any notion of rebellion against the Imperium, rather that they viewed the Imperial attack on the Astral Claws as a challenge to the sovereignty of the whole Adeptus Astartes. At the defeat of the rebellion, the Lamenters were granted the Emperor's forgiveness and subjected to a 100-year penitent crusade. However, their crusade led them straight into the jaws of High Fleet Kraken. The Lamenters fought hopeless battles, defending planets such as Malvolian and Devlin from the invading Tyranids, taking heavy losses in return. The last known census of the chapter reported only 3 companies of Lamenters remained. The Lamenters believe success and avoidance of the Red Thirst and Black Rage recently prompted the Blood Angels to eagerly attempt to contact their brothers to invite them to the conclave of chapters descended from Sanguinius in order to discuss the fate of their ill-starred bloodline. That venture to find the Lamenters have returned empty-handed. Despite their brutal war against the Tyranids, the Lamenters have emerged victorious, and their chapter master claims that they have only grown stronger. An event that occurred involving KXI Ophoros, an Imperial planetary governor who ordered the imprisonment of his subjects, began to behave strangely in the wake of the psychic awakening. They were kept in the Gal station, Desmotarius, and for reasons unknown, his guards could not bear to be around these prisoners, so they were only fed once every 3 days. One day, however, Space Marines clad in yellow and bearing bleeding heart emblems arrived on Ophoros' world. They then took the possession of the strange prisoners, as well as anyone else imprisoned in Desmotarius, and the governor gave no argument against the Space Marines for their release. Then, during the devastation of Baal, an event where the Tyranids attacked the Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal, the Lamenters were called into the defense of the planet. However, the chapter declined the call, as they were not of mind or size to help, with it also being only a few years after the devastating losses at the hands of High Fleet Kraken, and still within the 100-year of the start of the Penitent Crusade. I will next go over the organization of the Lamenters. As the Lamenters were created from altered Blood Angel stock, some in the Imperium believe that the Lamenters' inception was an attempt to breed out the deficiencies known to mar that otherwise superior DNA. If true, the experiment seemed to have been successful in its objectives for some time, as the Lamenters were long thought not to suffer from the Black Rage associated with Blood Angels' descendant chapters. Of course, the Lamenters are thought cursed in another way, suffering the most appalling twists of ill fortune and tragedy. The lack of typical Blood Angels deficiencies in their gene seed meant that the Lamenters were considered as a Codex Astartes adherent chapter for much of their history, although the nature of a fleet-based chapter does require some flexibility in this regard, with isolated fleet elements being forced to adapt their tactics to the resources available to them. Additionally, the Lamenters fought without direct Imperial support for most of their history, due to their reputation, instilling in them a sense of self-reliance, common in many Codex-style chapters who are much more comfortably meshed in the greater Imperial war machine. The regular outbreaks of misfortune that happened to the chapter also resulted in a great deal of flexibility and pragmatism developing in the Lamenters' philosophy, as well as their recruitment procedures. In combat, the Lamenters favor shock assault and close air support tactics, and are used to performing drop assaults and boarding actions. Lack of contact, both practical and philosophical, with the other sons of Sanguinius, resulted only in a number of Blood Angel-style arms and equipment existing in the chapter, and beyond this, the Lamenters also only own a small number of technical dreadnought suits. The apothecary department for the Lamenters does operate like that of the Blood Angels, however, with a type of sanguinary priest referred to as a calyx existing as a senior officer. This calyx priesthood has become more integral to the chapter in recent times, as the ghost of Sanguinius has manifested in the chapter, which in turn has resulted in the creation of a death company. Those that have succumbed to the Black Rage and are separated from the rest of their brothers, as they can cause collateral damage. The exact timeline of the Lamenters is unknown. However, tech priests have put together a rough approximation of the actions of the Lamenters. The Lamenters were founded in Millennium 36, which is often considered to be part of the cursed founding. In Millennium 37, the Lamenters departed for the western fringes of Imperial space and initiated a whole chapter-continuous crusade against the enemies of mankind. In Millennium 39, the Lamenters took part in the 9th Black Crusade, and the chapter is reduced to around 200 Marines in strength, and later lost in the warp for over a century. During the relief of Corellia, the Lamenters were only saved thanks to the efforts of the White Scars and Ultramarines. Millennium 41 is the bulk of known actions of the Lamenters. In 587 Millennium 41, the Lamenters were assigned to the Maelstrom Orders. In 698 Millennium 41, the Corps in the Crusade, with 300 Marines and the battle barge Daughter of Tempests, took part. 2/3 of the chapter were lost in the liberation of Slaughterhouse 3. In 812 Millennium 41, the Achilles Crusade, the Lamenters first appeared in the crusade to settle an honor debt to Cassius Latin, a rogue trader, and his dynasty. 4 squads that were then on the vessel left them with little survivors after a catastrophic drive failure in the Valiant's lament system. Some of these survivors were recruited into the Death Watch on a single kill team under Watch Captain Brand by Watch Commander Mordegale, while others continued their servants alongside Space Marines of other chapters. 904 Millennium 41, the Lamenters entered the Badab War with approximately 870 Marines. In 908 Millennium 41, the Lamenters surrendered to Imperial Justice with only 311 Marines remaining. In 912 Millennium 41, the Lamenters were sentenced to a 100-year penitent crusade due to their opposition of the Imperium's forces during the Badab War. Approximately 992 Millennium 41, the Lamenters encounter a High Fleet Kraken, where contact is subsequently lost with them. Roughly a year later, in 993 Millennium 41, the Lamenters fought with High Fleet Kraken, with the Red Hunters following them. Both suffered losses, with the Lamenters eventually prevailing in the conflict. In the closing years of Millennium 41, the Lamenters abstained from joining their brothers in the devastation of Baal, stating that even if they were to join, their numbers were too depleted. Like other chapters discussed before, the Lamenters have unique elements about them. Notable artifacts of the Lamenters include the Banner of Tears. After the Lamenters' part in the Badab War, the chapter banner was a tattered remnant. When they were granted the Emperor's forgiveness, the banner was given to the Adeptus Sororitas to be repaired and purified. Their handiwork was said to be inspired by the Emperor, and that they wept as they wove, contemplating the Emperor's great sacrifice for humanity. The banner became known as the Banner of Tears, and was taken with the Lamenters on their penitent crusade. The Catechist, a powerful inferno pistol wielded by the chapter master. The Glaive and Carmine, a two-handed, master-crafted power weapon also wielded by the chapter master. There are only 2 recorded names of their fleet. The Daughter of Tempests, a battle barge captured by the Minotaur's chapter during the Bedab War, and the Martyr Suspria, a strike cruiser. Notable Lamenters include Malakim Foros, Master of Lamenters, Lord of Ruin, Watcher of the Deeps, and their chapter master, who is believed both dead and alive, and Chiron, a member of the Lamenters interred in a dreadnought. Chiron avoided the ultimate fate of the Lamenters due to being on assignment with the Death Watch. He believes himself to be the last surviving member of the Lamenters. This concludes the information regarding the Lamenters. More in-depth information regarding them will be recorded at a later date. This is Librarian Elias, signing off.